The vet was one of the gnarliest places for wild-ass edgy roller skating I'd ever known. Think of her as a concrete Grand Canyon of challenges on wheels. Her ramps and circular loops were great places for mountain bike rides or long-distance runs, all with a promise you'll never see another living soul. The full rip was to be alone in the vet beneath whatever light the night gave you, looping the 600 level, letting go of the cares that infest the day as you roll on silver wheels, falling in love again with the unforgettable views of Philadelphia. Once you've seen the city this way, you own it forever. You're as high above ground as you can be, rimming the outer edge of the big oval, maybe 100 feet high. Nothing but a thin rail between you and the city in the night. In my mind's eye, I can still see her from what was, at that time, the highest view available. There you are on roller skates, so comfortable you forgot there aren't part of you, alive with the night, reveling in one of the greatest views of the city of brotherly love that ever existed. I've never felt so childlike, free. In a word, it was bliss. The vet became my sacred plaything. I loved her as I would one day love the woman of my dreams. I couldn't get enough of her. I never thought of this when I lived in the stadium, but my relationship with her was schizophrenic in that I often shared the stadium with over 65,000 others at raucous sporting events in the evening, only to sit hours later high in the stadium, alone in a profound silence when everyone else had gone home. In a way, I hadn't left, but they'd gone home too. Sitting in the top row, the 700 level, meditating at times like this, drove me inside myself to where my deepest meanings were. Such times could be life-altering if you let them in. I needed to let them in. If you knew the stadium well and had the incredible opportunity to spend enough time alone with her, you came to grips with something just beyond the feathered edge of reality. Some residue of life and fantasy was there. Some spirit and energy from the fans seeped into the steel and concrete. Something ineffable took on a life of its own and lived there. The vet could be unoccupied, but she was never empty. In her essence lived so many incredible, vivid, and wonderful Philadelphian sports memories, memories of joy and heartbreak mingled over the years. At night, when the vet was dark and empty, its spirit to me was palliative. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and I'm the host of Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The purpose of our program is to give our audience the experience of the rich culture of poetry writing and writing in the city of Philadelphia. So tonight we have somewhat of a different show, but very much like all the shows that we have. This is very much about Philadelphia. And the excerpt that I read in the introduction is from a book written by our guest, Tom Garvey, called The Secret Apartment, That Stadium, A Surreal Memory. Tom Garvey is a longtime friend of mine. Tom grew up in Chester. He attended St. James High School. And on his return from Viet Nam, he graduated magna cum laude from Widener University. In addition to this book, The Secret Apartment, Tom has written another book before this called Many Beaucoup Magics, about his experience, and I would say mystical experience in Vietnam. So welcome, Tom Garvey. And I want to say also about his experience in the service. Tom was an Airborne Ranger Special Service qualified officer. He served as an A-team leader in Vietnam in 1968 and returned home to what he says is mixed reviews about his stability and state of mind. Like many other Vietnam vets, he found few cared to hear about his time overseas. Now, with his wife, Peggy, and his wonderful family of 5 stepchildren and their mates, and 1 world-class grandchild, he has finally come home. Life is good. Life is very good indeed. Tom, life is very good. So, Tom, after 40 years, and I think it's 40 years, not to the date, that you lived in the vet and you established this unbelievable story. What drove you to finally sit down and write it? And there were many people who were waiting for it.
Well, I'm really happy that it came from some really pure motives. I just wanted to create some fun and a little pressure release for friends when the pandemic started. 1 year ago, we had no idea what we were going into. Little did we know we'd lose as many people as we lost in World War II. I went out to the store one day right after St. Patrick's Day, and there were no cars on the road. And the whole experience was shifting under our feet. And so I decided towards the end of the month to start writing little short stories and sending them to some friends on Facebook. It's simple enough. I didn't get one out until late at night on the last day of the month, but I made my deadline to get something out, and I got a nice response from it. A couple of days later, I sent out another story, and every 3 or 4 days or a week, I would send out stories to my friends. I was surprised at how many people were following this and reading these stories and their response. And they were all emoting. They were all having a heartfelt experience and really enjoying it. And someone said, you've got over 30,000 words here. It was Lois Hoffman, I think. She said, there's 30,000 words here. She's the happy self-publisher, and she helps people, format things and put them together. So I started putting it together, and I wanted to get it out, and I finally got it out, I think, about the 3rd day in December. I didn't know what to expect. I have to admit, I'm a bit gobsmacked by what did happen, but someone told me that Angelo Cataldi had interest in this, and he was asking questions of people with some background at Vet Stadium. And someone else told me, if Angelo's interested, you better get him a book, because he'll never buy the book on his own. He's really cheap. He always talks about that on the show. So then I found out that Angelo had the book, and he sent me an email and said that he was reading the book and he was really enjoying it. On Saturday, what's the 3rd, 4th, the 6th of December, I guess, he sent me an email and said, would I be on a show? I said, sure. Sunday, he sent me another one, said, could I be on it the following Wednesday, which was the 9th? I said, okay. So I went on his show, and things took off like a rocket. A little bit later that month, Stephanie Farr wrote a couple of really, really good articles. She came out here and interviewed me, and she wrote a great article for the Inquirer and the Daily News. And it's the response is, I can't believe it. I mean, I didn't expect this. I just wanted to get my money back and maybe get a roof on the house, repair the roof. And it took off like a skyrocket.
Well, I'm not surprised that this has happened, because when they were tearing down Vet Stadium on Talk Sports Radio, they had weeks-long reminiscences of different things about Vet Stadium. And there were some very interesting stories. And I sat there listening to that, and I said, my God, I hope Tom Garvey calls in and he tells him about his the saga of living in the vet. And I don't think that ever happened. And I kept saying all the time, Tom should write these stories, because I was never in the apartment, but I heard so much about it from different people that had been there, and some of the the wonderful stories. Tom, when one reads your book, and I've read it twice, the recounting of these things is so vivid. I say to myself, this is 40 years removed. Did you keep a notebook or a diary of those experiences? Or this just really came from you, just from your recollections of those days and those years there?
No, I think for me, I did something better. I told the story so many times. It was like, I was trying to think about how many times in a year I might tell the story. I'll bet I've told the story almost every one of those years, almost like once a week, because there'd be some occasion I might be standing in line at a beer distributor, holding a case of beer, and some guy behind me has a Philly shirt on. I'd say, the vet. I said, that's really great, and I said I used to live there, and he'd say something like, yeah, I used to go down to all the games too. I was down there all the time. I said, no, I meant I used to live there. And you'd look at this, the expression would come across his face, and we'd start to talk. And I didn't have that much time with these people in the time it took to get to the cashier and go on your way. But it went from, sometimes you could see people, they were just kind of humoring you, but sometimes you'd see people like, no, this can't be, and that, what I'm learning is, as I'm being interviewed like this, that incredulity in people was probably one of the things that kept me from getting caught. People couldn't believe it then. It just didn't compute. They couldn't. It just, yeah, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. Tom, you've written the other book before this, and there's been some time. But I don't think anybody, understands that you are a Vietnam vet, but I don't think anybody can really understand the fusion of that experience and your being at the vet. Can you share with us, because we're really talking about that same experience that so many vets experiencing coming back from duty and you from war. Can you talk about that?
There have been a lot of books written by vets about the war. I think they all needed that catharsis, and I needed it too. And I was struggling. What was unfulfilled in me during those vet years was it never was coming together in terms of, I really needed to write a story that gave a voice to the mothers whose children didn't come home from the war. I didn't need to defend the war or explain the war, but I got involved with the mothers of 7 friends of mine who were killed in Vietnam. I tracked them down, and I'd call them on the phone, usually around times when I knew my friends' birthdays were, or holidays and things like that. Time of their deaths, I knew where their mothers' heads were, but their mothers' heads were there all the time. That's one of the things I learned. It wasn't just certain times of the year. And I needed to somehow tell the story of their kids who weren't John Wayne or anything else. They just felt that it was something that they had to do, their country, and got involved in it. Certainly was an unpopular war. And I think that their deaths were even harder for their mothers to accept. I mean, if someone died in World War II, you knew that was something that had to happen because the world was at the brink. Vietnam was a different situation, and it was highly politicized. And I just needed to tell the story of these women, and I couldn't do it. Everything I wrote didn't come up to it. It wasn't until after the vet, and there was a healing process there. It did soothe me in ways and get me through some darker times and prepared me for another phase of my life in the 1980s when I met my wife, Peg. And Peg she shies away from this, but all of my writing only came about because of her belief in me and love for me and acceptance of me. And I was able to do that. I'm very proud of Many Buku Magics. I think it's a more serious book and a better book but it's much different than The Secret Apartment. But it fits into the trilogy of surrealistic memoirs that I want to write. The third one will be The Long Ago Girl, and that's about Peg, when Peg came into my life. Mm-hmm. And she was frustrated for a while with me because I wasn't getting anywhere, and she once threatened to put me in a cabin in the woods and lock me in there with just enough food to last for a little while. And and she was just going to boycott me for a while until I produced something, mm-hmm. Put up or shut up. And
So one place in the book, you use the term, I was in a holding pattern. And is that a good way to explain your life?
It is.
I was in a holding pattern.
It is. It is. I didn't want to commit to anything seriously in terms of, I had no goals in terms of no work goals. I had a college degree with honors. I could have gone to graduate school. And once those years slipped away and I hadn't done that, I kept talking about writing and doing some writing, but nothing measured up to what I wanted or thought it should be. And I was really tilting at windmills. And I was in a holding pattern where I wasn't living my life, but I was sort of looking at my life, from the outside looking in. Peg brought me home. She really brought me home, and she gave me everything I needed in my heart and my soul. And I would share my writing with her. The highest compliment I've gotten from my book ever was one morning about This Is Many Buku Magics. Several months after it had been published, I came down one morning and she was sitting in the living room and she was crying. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Nothing." She said she had the book in her hands and she said, "You did it." And she said she was reading from a chapter called Farewell to Arms, from there to the back of the book again. And she said, "You did it." She said, "You did what you set out to do, and I'm really proud of you, and I love you." And she got up and gave me a big hug, and nothing, that was the pinnacle. I mean, if I'd gotten the Nobel Prize for Literature, it wouldn't have meant half as much as knowing that the woman I loved believed in what I'd done and was proud of it as I was.
Yeah, that's the greatest affirmation you can get.
Yeah, yeah.
When you,
I mean,
when you get it, when you get it
yeah,
there.
yeah. There've been some really great ones, but that was it.
I was surprised, Tom. Yeah. So the pivot for so much of a life built around, you establish relationships with some of the greatest athletes in Philadelphia. I mean, Tug McGraw and, members of the Philadelphia Eagles football team back in the day. There's all that.
No birds.
Yeah. What were some of the, if you could say, well, this is really one of the most interesting experiences that I had while I was there. And I know it's very difficult to pin it down to one. Can you share that with us?
Let's see. Billy Bradley was one of the most interesting people I met in the city because Billy was a great athlete, and we spent a lot of time together and time down in Texas. I mean, Billy kidnapped me and took me down to Texas against my will, and that was a great time. But I never got to see Billy play. I never saw Billy play because when I came home from Viet Nam in the early '70s, it was college and work at the same time, full-time job, full-time student, and then a couple of years after that, I was just not. I didn't watch a lot of television. I didn't, attend sporting events. I was sort of like in another place. And then when I got to the vet, by the time I got down to the vet, Billy was leaving. His career was over in Philadelphia. So that was around '77. And that's about the time he was traded to, I think, the Cardinals. He finally retired from the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals. But Billy was a great experience. Jerry Sizemore was a great friend. Terry Totolo, Ozzy, all those guys. I mean, they were really, and it was kind of neat too with Spagnola and Bunning and Giamona. Like at those times, they were kind of like they reminded me in some ways of people I had been in Vietnam with. Some people on my Special Forces A team, bunch of guys. They had a tough job and. It could go south in a lot of ways. I mean, they every time they put on a helmet, things could happen where they could end up, paralyzed or something real big. There could be a lot was on the table.
Yeah.
And that was their life. And I could identify with that part of, the experience down there.
When I read those interactions that you had, Bill Bradley, I knew was one of the most storied football players in Texas high school football history. And he played for the University of Texas. He was a quarterback. I mean, I really knew about these guys back then when I really followed them. But when I read these stories about your interactions with them, I really get the sense that they saw you as very much of not only the equal, but somebody that they admired. You know, here's a guy. Yeah, I'm a rough and tough guy on the football field, but here is a guy that was in Vietnam. But here's not a guy that talks a lot about it. And I really feel, you know, and I really get the sense of that in all the experiences you talk about and sharing your life with those fellows.
Yes, it was like that in some ways, and they did have a lot of respect for my military background, and
I think you also
hard to put it. This is hard for me to put in words, you know, and I'm usually pretty good with words, but it's I'm kind of running into a wall. But it was almost like an after action report to be with them right after a game, like hours after a game, having a beer somewhere with some of where they were, you know, breaking each other's beans about something they'd done or not done or hadn't done right, you know, and relating different events and how they saw it from there. It was almost like an after action report. It was almost like a bunch of guys after an operation or some some nightmare that we used to get in all kinds of jackpots out on the border and then sit around and talk about it. I could relate to that. And I did identify with that moment a lot. It was really, yeah.
But you were also an ambassador for Philadelphia. So, I mean, I think, plugged a lot of those guys in who were not from Philadelphia, right, into, you know, the mainstream of life in Philadelphia, not just Bar, but the mainstream of life. And I really could tell that in reading the book. You were really an ambassador of sorts. I
love Philly. I've always loved Philly. I've always loved Philly. This was, you know, I've always identified. I mean, if you asked me where I was from, I would have said Philly, even though I grew up in the burbs and then lived in the city in many different places, you know, as an adult. I lived in all different sections of the city. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And so we're talking about the Eagles, but you also had a relationship with Tug McGraw.
McGraw was McGraw. Well, McGraw was, you know, John McManus. Sure. And John McManus was, when I rewrote the Many Buku Magics about Vietnam, it was written in the first person. It was a memoir. And I didn't want the reader to understand that the person telling the story was going to survive what happened to me on August 17th. It all led up to that, and I was having, precognitive dreams about that, and I didn't want to give that away, so I switched it to the third person and used McManus's name. But back to McGraw. McGraw and McManus were best friends. And John was with Tug when he passed away. Hank was there. They were out at Tim's place out in Tennessee. And he said that when Tug died, the moment he died, he was holding a baseball in his left hand. And John and Hank brought some of his ashes back to Philadelphia. And then I accused him later of losing them. That's part of the book about hauling Tug's ashes. But Tug was a character, and he was a great storyteller. I mean, he's the one that came up with. He told me one time at, I think it was at Jack's Firehouse up in Fairmount. He told me a story about he was fantasizing that if I got caught living in the stadium when I did, and by then I was, you know, I think I was out of there at the time. I'm not sure, but he said your uncles would have fed your body through the machine that makes hot dogs down in Chester, Medford's Meats, and you would have gone out of this world up on the 700 level with mustard all over your tail. And then he thought of this and he said, your coffin would have been a hot dog roll. And that was so funny to him. It's a funny line. He fell off his stool. I mean, he lost it. He went down. He went down to the floor and didn't, you know, he went down pretty hard, as I recall. And he didn't care. He was laughing so hard. I mean, it was a great image. Yeah. But he had a point. Yeah. He had a point. Was a sobering moment. I was like, oh yeah, well, that's funny, but it's also not funny.
Yeah, it was. I met him because at the London, because McManus was the bartender there. So I met him a couple of times, and he was, as you say, he was like you. He was a great storyteller. Yeah, and if you stayed around, you could have been there all night listening to him.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He really had, because he had the story about the Mets, and then the stories about about the Phils. Tom, you mentioned one part of your book, what a struggle it is for you to write. And to be honest with
Oh,
you, I find that really incredible when you say
yeah.
you're so challenged. So can you talk about how you approach writing and how you kind of attack this barrier that you said that what a struggle it is to write?
My mind can be like a pinball machine, where it's going all over the place. So the blank page and the solitude of writing is it's difficult for me to just settle down and sit and go inside myself. And I think that one of the things I draw on sometimes is the time at the vet. That was a good time for me because, as you were reading at the opening of this piece, to sit atop of the 700 level at night with a full moon and just be up there by yourself and nobody in the place, where maybe 36 hours before there have been 65,000 crazed people there, to have that kind of solitude, that was kind of good for me. And it was lonely, but I kind of I embraced the loneliness of it. And I think eventually that led to me being able to take bigger pieces of this loneliness and be inside myself, where I could come up with the stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I never had to make anything up. I just had to remember it all. And as you asked about notes, I didn't have notes, but I told the story so many times. I mean, I was kind of like refining the descriptions, not the content, but the descriptions over and over again.
Mm-hmm. But your time there also, you kind of struck up relationships with different important people in the facility, whether it be the mailman, whether it
Yeah,
be somebody in administration. I find that really fascinating because they kind of grease the wheels for you in certain things, and the
yeah,
fact that if my memory is serving me right, you had a city phone that was
yeah.
also that you had access to where people would call, and you had a mailing address, so mail would arrive there for Tom Garvey. I guess it would go to some place in the administration. Can you talk about that? I mean, how
Well,
you really
yeah. All those people were important because they were part of the city. They were part of the vet, and they were part of the whole experience. I mean, Charlie the mailman was a friend of mine. So some friends a couple of times sent me mail addressed just to Tom Garvey, Vet Stadium, 19148. That's all that was on it. It was a postcard. And what happened, I know what happened. It went to 19148, and then it went into Charlie's mailbag, and he would deliver mail to the vet. He knew me, he knew my name. So once it got to Charlie, it was home free. He would take that and he would bring it down to the Nylon Brothers office downstairs, where they got all their mail properly addressed. I mean, I'm sure, like, if you probably wrote something to if you wrote Pete Rose, Vet Stadium 19148, it would have gotten to him. I don't know if anybody ever did that, but they would have known, once it got to 19148, where it was going to go. And that's how I got my mail.
There's one fascinating chapter that you tell, and I heard this even before I saw the book. It was about somebody, I think it was up around Syracuse, who had actually been there, but when he tried to tell other people, uh, they just wouldn't believe it. But then you kind of enter the scene. Or somebody enters the scene. That was a very fascinating story. Can you share that with us?
That's a story about that's McManus. That's a story about McManus and the time that his father died. And somebody, Skip Denenberg. I saw Skip Denenberg down at the TLA or someplace, and he said, "Have you seen McManus late?" And I said, "I haven't talked to him in about a month. I saw him about 6 weeks ago." He said, "Well, his father's dying," and he said he's really up. He's worried about that. And so I called up John, and I said, "John," I said, "why don't you come down Saturday? Temple's playing Syracuse. That was his alma mater." I said, "Well, why don't you come down? We'll catch a game and a hot dog and a beer, and come on down." So he came down, and we went and watched the game. And at halftime, we'd been over in the secret apartment before the game and having a beer and listening to some music. So we were heading back there at halftime, and he ran into a guy that he had gone to school with at Syracuse and hadn't seen in 10 years. And this guy was that legendary guy that everybody knew from college that you didn't think would be alive at graduation. I mean, Jay Haight was a legendary, party guy, drinking drugs. I mean, he was a wild man. He's coming through the crowd, careening off people. His body is painted orange. He has no shirt on. He's got this look in his eyes. I mean, mothers were grabbing their children and moving them to the wall. Everybody was trying to get away from him. I saw him coming, but I didn't know who he was. He was just another guy coming our way. And as he gets closer, John and he see each other, and they scream each other's names. And they're embracing, dancing around. And so after a few minutes, John says, "Hey, Jay, you want to smoke a joint?" So he says, he looks around. I think he was ready to light up right there. He says, no, not here. He says, Tommy has an apartment. So we took him into the secret apartment, and he didn't bat an eyelash. He just walked in there like it was the most normal thing in the world. We sat down. We had some music on the stereo. We had some beers out of the refrigerator. We're having a good time. And he hasn't, it's like old time week. They're just catching up. This is a really crazy man. This is a guy who got stopped on the New York freeway by 2 state police after a Grateful Dead concert, and they said, "You know how fast you were going? We had a speed trap." He says, "I don't know, officer, maybe 55, 60 miles an hour. I'm sorry, I won't do it again." They say, "We clocked you at 27 miles an hour." I mean, this guy was in another universe. And they said, "Your license says you have to have glasses when you wear your glasses." And he said, "I have a prescription windshield." And Jay did not go home that night. He went, I think he got sick on their shoes right after that. And so this is Jay Haight. So at the end of all this, it's time for the second half. And I said, we start to stand up. I said, "We better get outside." And he gets halfway up and he stopped. He goes back into his chair. And he looks around, he says, "Where are we?" It's like he just woke up that he's in a strange place. And then he said, "Where am I that I can tell them," the guys he was with, "where I was, that they won't think I'm crazy?" And I realized in that moment that this is somebody came back from going to the men's room a lot of times came back from this, with a story where people did think he was crazy, and with good reason. He said, "Jay, we'll explain it to him." I said, "Where are you sitting? We'll get some beers and we'll join you guys in a little while. We'll find you." So he told us where we were. We went out there looking for him. We couldn't find him. I mean, how hard is it to find 20 or 30 guys with their bodies painted orange, out in a sunny day at Vet Stadium? We couldn't find him anywhere. So that was it. And I never saw him again in my life, but McManus's dad died. He went back to Syracuse for the funeral and all that. And his friends took him out to the Big Orange up there, bar right off campus that everybody went to. And late, just before last call, he looks across the bar and he spots Jay Haight. Jay Haight screams so loud, silence in the bar, and he's dragging everybody with him, coming around, knocking people over, running up to John, and he grabs him like a drowning man and says, tell them. He's got all these friends with him. He says, "Tell them about the stadium, that place we were, that apartment, all." And John looks at him with a straight face and says, "Jay, I haven't seen you in 12 years. What are you talking about? You look good, but what are you talking about?" And it was McManus said it was the cruelest thing he ever did. He said, because I'd gone too far. And this guy kind of dropped to his knees and just started to cry because he thought also that maybe he hadn't seen John in 12 years. Mm-hmm. And then Joey and John said, wait a minute. No, it's all true. And he told the story and it was okay. It was okay. But he said, I was really sorry I did it when I did it.
Mm-hmm. Tom, how did you come to find this little niche in that stadium?
Well, I had a key. They gave me a key to the building. Mistake. And I had my own key, my own door, and I had a storage area. And just before camp one year in '79, Richard Osborne, Ozzy, came to me and said his leash was up. He was afraid of signing a new lease because his 2 roommates were at that time Terry Totolo, the Samoan linebacker, and Louis Giamona, Vermeil's nephew, a running back, and they were California guys. Terry was out in Long Beach. Louis was up in Calistoga, and they weren't going to show up till the last minute before camp. So he said, it's on me to sign the lease. And he said, I'm afraid to do it. If I get cut, he said, those 2 guys could get me in a real jackpot while I'm back in San Antonio hoping to get a phone call from some other team. He said, can I store my furniture in your apartment? or not your apartment, in that storage room you have. So we put all of his stuff in there, and he did get cut, and he went back to San Antonio, and I forgot about his furniture. I remember taking a plane and saying, "What do you want me to do with it?" He says, "You can burn it. I don't care. I'm out of here." So I forgot about it till the Pope came to town, and the night before the Pope came to town, I found out 36 hours before the Mass at Logan Circle, which had around 1.25 million people in the Parkway area for that Mass. The city had no way of knowing how many people were coming. They'd never had an event like this before that wasn't some kind of a holiday where business would be off. But it was a work day. It was like Wednesday in the middle of the week, and anybody that had a business obligation in the city had to come to work. So they had all those people plus whatever this number would be that they couldn't even calculate. And I'm driving up Broad Street. I thought I got 2 days off. I'm heading for the shore. I'm going to go down the shore and kick back. It's a beautiful time in October, Indian summer, wonderful weather. And out of the radio comes this voice saying that Vet Stadium parking lots will be open at 4 in. And what they're suggesting is, if you can't take public transportation, go to the vet, park down there, get on the subway at the corner of Broad and Patterson, and take it up to City Hall and walk up the short distance to the Parkway to Mass. That would solve a lot of problems and take a lot of pressure off things. So I had nobody to work. Nobody. I mean, my supervisors all had jobs, the older guys. The younger guys were all in school. And initially, school wasn't supposed to be canceled. They did cancel at the last minute, but I couldn't get my crew back together for that. Nothing was scheduled. And so I called Seamus at Dobbs, and we put together a crew, but I couldn't trust them to show up at 4 in with their clothes on, knowing what planet they're on. So what I decided to do was we'd meet at Dobbs at 9 o'clock. I'd stand them for some pitchers of beer and burgers, and around 10:30, we'd all caravan down to the vet, and I'd have a captive audience. We'd have a sleepover, which was a great idea, actually, and it did come off without any nightmarish situations. And so that's how I got my crew down there. And we slept the night before, as I said, in that storeroom with all that furniture. And someone in the dark, Michael McNally from the electric factory, said, "Hey, if you just cleaned up this room and rearranged the crap that you got in here," he said, "this would be the coolest apartment in the world." And in the dark, I'm thinking, yeah, why didn't I think of that? I mean, I ended up having the Phillies and the Eagles playing, 50 feet from my front door. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was magnificent. And I moved a refrigerator. I set up a whole little kitchenette in there. I could cook. I could survive. I mean, I've heard a lot of things said since the book came out about the rats and the smells and this. I didn't have rats. I knew that rats don't eat concrete and steel. So I had the place really sterile. I mean, if there was any food ever in there, whatever was left went right in the refrigerator. I kept it in the refrigerator until I could get out of the building. There was never a morsel of food anywhere the rat could, they went elsewhere to dine. It was great. And it was warm in the winter because I had some space heaters. I had AstroTurf carpets because they had new carpeting on the vet that year. So I got the best. I didn't get the old stuff. I got the new stuff, leftovers and odds and ends piece. But the whole thing was carpeted. I had the space heaters. I had an electric fireplace. I mean, it was cozy. I had some great lighting, and it was home. I mean, you could really be comfortable there. I mean, to be in the vet at night by yourself and reading a book and get up and you want to take a walk or go out, I'd get on my bike and ride my 10-speed bike around the building at night, or rollerblade, or if I was going to do a run, I could run. You could run those ramps. You could train there. You'd never see a single soul ever. Mm-hmm. Well, there were a couple of exceptions, but they were notable.
So how long did you live there, Tom?
Okay, from the 2nd of October, 1979, the night before the Pope came to town, because the Mass was on the 3rd of October, I think, a Wednesday, if I remember correctly, till the last days of 1981, when the contract was up for parking, which gave me no access to the, private access to the building or to that room. So 2 years and about 3 or 4 months, I guess.
Okay. And but you had a relationship, family relationship with the people who ran the concessions, including
uncles.
the parking. Yeah, their uncles. And who were they? Your
Well,
uncles?
they were the Nylon brothers. I mean, these are guys that right after World War II started selling. There were four brothers. They used to have potluck suppers. They had no money, and one of them got a job on a construction site. And at dinner that night at one of their houses, he made a passing comment about, he said it was so cold out there today. Some of those guys would have killed for a hot cup of coffee. The three brothers that didn't have a job the next day took the back seat out of my mom's 46 Plymouth, and they were selling coffee out of thermos jugs that there they are. That's down in South Carolina. That was their second big job, their third big job. And they made a business out of this, and they started doing high school football games. And then in 1950, and this is unbelievable, but they won the contract for the Army-Navy game at JFK Stadium. Then it was called Municipal Stadium. And that's 105,000 people. Plus, also either Army or Navy every year would play Notre Dame. So there was a second game with 105,000 people. So they had two events like that. And their lives took off like a rocket. They also, because of that contact through the military and Bob Nylon's gift of gab and ability to sell a job, they got the Savannah River Project, that photo you showed, that was down in Aiken, South Carolina. That was 3 years as on-the-job feeding, not a cup of coffee out of the backseat of a car through a hole in the fence, but for 37,000 workers building the Savannah River Project, which was DuPont and the United States government's top secret building of the bomb plant. And they had 3 years of that. And once they got to a point where all the improvements were in, roads, utilities, everything they needed, fencing, then they had to get the heck out because, it was top secret and the government took over. And but that really set them off. Then they got the farm show building. But in 1971, they got a 15-year contract for a Vet Stadium. What a crown jewel in their throne. 15 years, exclusive food and drink and novelties inside Vet Stadium for 15 years. They had the Army-Navy game from 1950 to 1986 every year except 1983, I think, when the game was played at the Meadowlands. They thought they'd move it a little closer to, West Point, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. They came back to the Vet. But they had a lot. They sold a lot of hot dogs. Tug McCraw was not far wrong. I mean, if I'd put mustard on their faces, it would have gotten ugly. I mean, it would have been a tsunami of grief, as I said. It would have been grim.
Yeah. So, Tom, you've had a lot of success now in selling the book, and there's so much still to come. Where are you going with the book? I've always, I see so much, you see so many, films and things about Philadelphia. And so where are you going with it now? What's happening? Can you tell us?
I can't discuss all of that, but I mean, there's talk and it's a great story, and I'm hoping it gets some legs. My son Judd has been really good with this and in making a lot of contacts, and we've talked to a lot of people in Hollywood and and so forth, and it has potential. I mean, it's loaded with potential because it's a great story. And I don't say that because I wrote it. It's just a great story because that's the way life shaped the whole thing. It has a lot of, there's a lot of angles here.
So, but even beyond that, you indicated before that you have another writing project.
Oh yeah.
In mind. Can you take us there and how that ties into? You said it's a trilogy. How that all ties in together?
Yeah, it'll be more like The Secret Apartment than many Buku Magics, but it's the story of, as I said, of meeting a woman on a street corner in Philadelphia and being infatuated with her and losing her, but she opened up certain avenues in my mind in terms of looking at the war and the people that were against the war and some of the people that lost also that was working on me, the mothers of, guys I'd known and so forth. I mean, this bracelet, this right here, this is Armando Ramirez he's from Wilcox, Arizona. He was 19 years old. He was one of the people who was involved in saving my life. So no question about what would have happened had they not shown up. And, Henry and I were surrounded and outnumbered about 10-1, and we had about 60 Montagnards with us and a couple of battalions of very angry North Vietnamese surrounding us. And Armando was one of the guys that came in at the last minute and saved us. And he could have gone home the following March. He turned 21 the following February, so he was 19 then. February 1st, he turned 20 years old. March 15th, he could have gone home and walked away from it, going back to college, as many of us did. But he didn't. He extended his tour, and in May 23rd, it's coming up, the anniversary of this is coming up. He was killed in a really hairy insertion of secret operatives deep in Cambodia. His mother was 41 years old when Armando was killed in 1969. And through many buku magics, I got to meet the family and know the family, his brother and his sister-in-law and all that. And Jessie Ramirez, that was his mother's name. She died just 2 years ago. She was 91 when she died. And she never got over it. She never got over it. I mean, it broke her heart to her last breath. And so I want to tell the story of what it's like for a vet to come home. That's what that's the theme in all of this. It's just a guy coming back where people were questioning his sanity and trying to fit in and thinking that maybe the world changed, but not knowing that it's not them, it's me. I've changed, and I'm looking at things differently, and I have different values. And the vet was a great opportunity, my time there, as we talked about, to sort things out and find something of value inside myself and a direction. The Long Ago Girl is the story of, it was years later, I met my wife, Peg, the girl of my dreams down in Wildwood. And I'd forgotten about the girl in the corner long before that and never thought about her again. But when I met Peg, she gave me a home, and she gave me the respect of a dynamic woman. And Peg was beautiful it's like F. Scott Fitzgerald talks about, he describes a woman, he said she was beautiful, but not like those women in the magazines. And he describes her a little bit, and he said she was beautiful from deep down in her soul. And Peg brought that to me, and she brought me, she believed in me more than I believed in myself. And that came home to roost, and I was able to finish many buku magics. And I was able to finish this book, and I'm ready to do the next one. I have the confidence, and I can do this. I can do this. It's been done already. It's all in my head. I've told these stories. I just have to, organize them and put them in order and do a lot of editing and all that. But I hope to have that out before Christmas. And that's my best story. And I'm intimidated by it a little bit. This is serious business. A lot's on the line with this one. Mm-hmm. I have some sacred duty to just for my love for Peg to tell this story right and really get this one right. There's a lot on the table.
So you have it in your mind. You have how you're going to write this, but you haven't really started to write it. Is that?
Oh no, I've started. I've got. Yeah. Before we came together here this afternoon, I've got 20-some thousand words. I just don't know what order they go in. So I'm working that, and I've got a whole list of some of the stories I want to put in there, and I'll have a timeline from the time I meet her in 1983, and how our story. It's a great story. I say that because I've told this story, with great response 1,000 times. A lot of my friends have heard this story. And about meeting her and how it all came together and things really worked out for us.
Right. Tom, there's one very beautiful part. Well, there's incredible parts in all parts of the book, but there's this one very lovely part. It's a very short chapter in the book, and it's about your winning a poetry contest
Oh, yeah.
at a writers' conference, and you weren't expecting that to
No,
happen,
no,
and your mom was there.
yeah.
Can you tell us about that? I
Yeah,
love that part of the book.
it was beautiful. It was the Philadelphia Writers Conference, which back in 1978, 79, I don't know where it is now, but I know they had up around 4th and Arch at a hotel there. But back those couple of years, it was down there by Vet Stadium on the corner of 10th and Packer, the hotel over there. I think it was a Hilton for a while, and it might have been a Holiday Inn. It's changed, management several times. I don't even think it's there anymore. In fact, I'm sure it's not. But it was there, and I had written a poem called Southern Wind I signed up for a poetry class section, and they wanted us to write a fresh poem and submit it for a contest. So I did that, and there was a guy from New York who was a national poet, and he was there as a student. He wasn't teaching a class at that time, and we thought he'd be a shoo-in for this. I wrote Southern Wind sitting on the curb at Vet Stadium while waiting to be as a cashier before Phillies games, because I had to be out there real early. I was the early man, they called me. So I was out there at 2 p.m, and the circus had come to town. It was across the street, and the elephants, had a lot to do with what was going on at that time. And I wrote this poem, and I submitted it. And when they announced the winner at the banquet the last night, my mother was there. She went as my date. The woman was going to go with me, couldn't make it. So my mom went, and she was telling everybody her son, Tommy, is going to be a writer. And I was embarrassed a little bit, but not really, because Mom, she was a really loving woman. She believed in me. And when they called out my name, my mother stood up and screamed, "That's my son. That's Tommy. He's going to be a writer." Now I'm in a room full of people that are writers. And it was kind of weird, but I went up and got my prize. And it's a good poem because, again, it's on that theme of coming home from Vietnam. I mean, that's how it starts. The title comes from a line from Shakespeare. There's a line, "I am mad but northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw." What Shakespeare meant was, in Elizabethan times, they believed that, as we do with the full moon, when the wind comes out of the northwest, the colder winds, they bring with it a certain madness. And so he's saying, when the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. A handsaw in Elizabethan times resembled a bird on the wing. It was a handle with a blade, so it was a V, and so it looked in silhouette. Almost, you couldn't tell whether it was a bird or a handsaw. And when the wind was southerly, he knew the difference. So that's where that comes from, and it's has to do with a guy coming home from Vietnam. It's Ulysses in this case, and he's there with Penelope. Everything's just the way he dreamed it would be. But
Could you recite it for us?
Yeah, I have it here.
Because it's in the book, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you read it for us, though?
Sure. Okay. Southern Wind. Long home from that journey, here with Penelope happily at her loom. The color of last night still lovely in our cheeks, all is peace. Yet in me there cries this restless voice, and though I somehow know better, some part of me where my meanings are paces in the past, there only do I live. To stand again on wooden, cold, high-winded decks, facing the northwest ice rains, those sleeted tears from home, so alive all that storied night, pursuing the darkness, always full sail. In sleep I'd also dream of other times, and in that composed slice of death I dream of thunder-red battle days, Achilles by my side, our strong, fabled, slashing bloodied arms, swinging fabled and great-weighted swords. Back to back, we denied the world access to our vulnerabilities. Later, by the fire on the reddened sand, tasting the wood-cast home wine, mourning those whose lives have splintered, I find I look with longing to the distant sea, and in my dream of war, I dream of home.
Oh, that's glorious, Tom. Tom, do you have you written much poetry? You know, I'm just reflecting back. I think it was one of the first times I ever met you at the London Bar. You were there reciting some poems live, and
Yeah,
so you know, I have a recollection of you writing poems.
yeah. I can't. I lost most of them. I have a few scattered around. There's a couple. I have a couple. I mean, I wrote one when I was a kid called "The Bully," and it was when I was small and bad. I often fell, and my mother would say, "See what God did to you." So I wondered what kind of God would push a kid.
Well, well, Tom, this has really been wonderful. I'm so glad that we could get you on. The book
Thank you.
is wonderful, and if anybody wants to, you know, get it, you can go on Amazon, The Secret Apartment Stadium, Surreal Memoir, as well as Tom's other book, Many Boku Magics, which is also a wonderful read. So I want to thank, you know, Tom. It's really been great. You're a great friend and you're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
And the other thing, I want to thank Ryan Doherty, who has
Yes.
really helped to put this technically together, and Sergio Galliano, who's the program director for PhillyChem, who has done this faithfully and flawlessly ever since we've, you know, started this. And the thing is, we're in our 50th broadcast, so it's kind of an anniversary night. So it's great that we have you for that.
Thank
The
you.
other thing is that this would not at all be possible without the Moonstone Art Center. And we, while we do this particular show, there's so much else we do. And if people want to support uh, Moonstone and PhillyChem, they can go to moonstoneartcenter.com and they can find out how they can make a contribution. So thank you very much. And I'll see you next month.